And hello everybody, and welcome back to the ride. Chapter 12, this time project auditing. Do not fear an audit. I have known many people to do, and they create quite a bit of stress. Do the right thing all the time, and an audit can be your friend to help you. So a project audit is some formal review that's going to help you focus on the matters that are most important to either an outside regulatory agency or your internal project effort, right? And so it is a means of appraisal and it gives you an evaluation. To me, a product will always, an audit will always have some recommendations. I'm looking to avoid findings, and they will usually recommend a few findings, and then I adjudicate those prior to the report going public. So the purpose of the valuation is to ensure that the process that we're working within is efficient, and that in that efficiency, I'm using the processes the way I planned, right? What happens when we make a plan? Things get out of control. They become more flexible. I'm looking for an audit to make sure I'm following the processes and building the tool, the widget maker, the way I wanted to. Because if something's wrong, I want to correct it, right? And it's going to lead to big success and future potential improvements along the way that I can apply to the entire corporation through the PMO. So the project audit is there to help me achieve my very goals. They're my ally. And so I want them to study all facets of the project along the way. And it's equivalent to total quality management, right? Where I manage, I'm looking at the project from a holistic perspective. And so I want to figure out what are my strengths and weaknesses, and some of those can be turned into best practices that we talked about in Chapter 11 as benchmarks, right? And I want them to make recommendations for my current project, and I want to share those with the population at large, the project population, and key stakeholders, because I can improve the company overall. Now, the recommendations might fall into this. I want to clarify scope. That's useful to do early. Cost and time relationships, right? The earlier I solve those issues, the less of a chance that they're going to be a problem to me. If I wait to address scope, cost, and schedule issues till later in the project, they cost more, risk increases, and my project likely goes into delay. It helps me improve my overall team performance and maybe locate even some technical improvements along the way. This is overall going to help me reduce costs, identify risks, etc. So I might have a quality audit. I might do a separate risk audit to make sure that and a procurement audit are three of the most common, right? But there are many more things that they could look at. Now, they're going to address my direct goals of the project. I want to make sure, again, this plan I've built I think will work. And remember, in control, we were comparing the plan to the actual results. Well, if the plan isn't being implemented, what am I comparing it to, right? The plan has to be right. So it's going to support my project goals and even some of my indirect goals, right? How can I help team members grow and develop as a recommendation, or even the parent organization when kicking off a project this way? So the advantages are many. So this is a slide of some examples of recommendations concerning what might be considered ancillary goals, right? Improving the processes for organizing and managing projects. So I'm thinking of OPAs, Organizational Process Assets. An OPA are processes, policies, and procedures. How can this audit help me on my project and the company as a whole improve their processes, policies, and procedures, right? And help me identify my SWOT. my strengths and weaknesses, an important tool whenever assessing the strategic nature of my project. And so some additional examples, review my response to my risks, right? And there's policy again that I just mentioned. Policies, procedures, and processes. So what I really want them to look at, especially the high potential ones, right? The ones with high probability or high impact, or can you help me identify a high potential achieving individual that I can groom and grow? That sort of thing. So there are some ancillary goals of this audit approach, and sometimes finding them can be a challenge, right? And that requires some deductive reasoning, which sometimes we just don't seem to have time for. And so ancillary goals are going to affect the decisions made on the project. That's why everything comes together into you, the project manager, so you can integrate the ancillary goals with the other goals, right? Ancillary goals, things you're hearing or studying from the culture, the key stakeholders, etc. They just so many dimensions to them. So some problems with indirect goals, though, is that it's difficult to hold people accountable. If you recall back in Chapter 11, I just quickly mentioned authority, accountability, and responsibility. It's kind of like a triangle, right? They have to be in balance, like your triple constraint. Or like a fire, right? A fire requires oxygen, it requires a heat source, and it requires oxygen, heat source, and fuel. Or you don't have a fire, right? And this is really what this is bringing together, right? Accountability, authority, and responsibility, right? And we want to be able to separate indirect goals from our own personal goals, right? It's not about our personal goals. We use our learning and experience to enhance achieving the other goals, the goals of the company, right? And in doing so, we're building trust. So this approach can help us avoid a lack of trust, right? And so the project audit is going to come in and look at my current state, and which is my actual place, and my plan, which was my expected status. And it's going to look at even the critical tasks that may be doing some deviation, and do some root cause analysis. That will be part of the assessment, which will also include risks, right? And then with the root cause analysis, I'm going to have lessons learned, now understand some of the limitations of the audit is that they're not operating in terms of the overall project knowledge, which I'm the only one that can integrate, the company culture, the stakeholder risk tolerance, etc., things we've talked about. So there are limits to it. But still, it's a broad sweep and yet a detailed look with some root cause analysis. And so with the audit, realize it's probably going to cost time and money. Should be done by an independent body outside of my project. So that could still be internal to the company. You might have an audit team that travels around. When I was in the Air Force and in maintenance, we had an audit team that would go out on the flight line, right? And they only worked right for the commander. They didn't work for anybody else. But it costs time and money, whether it's internal or you go out and contract it out. Sometimes people feel distracted by the audit team. And that's part of your messaging to make sure they understand the value. And then, of course, if you have a poor audit report, that isn't going to help anybody, either in your processes or in team morale. Now, you can have kind of a general audit or a detailed audit or a technical audit. Those are some of the types of audits. As I mentioned, I get a little more specific. I like a detailed technical audit of procurement, then of risk, and then of quality would be my focus points. Now, the timing of the audit. All projects should be audited. I agree with that. And if it's a larger project, I want to be audited several times. Early on is best because if I find errors early, then I fix them. It costs me less, doesn't throw off my schedule, and helps me adhere to scope, that triple constraint. So, but I even do an audit after the project is over, even or especially with procurement, to make sure I did procurement as well as I could in accordance with company policies. Procurement is expensive, and it's something we don't have a lot of control over, so an audit can be very useful after the project is complete. Now, the format and use of the audit, it's usually confidential documents. You want to keep it controlled. You want to make sure you manage the messaging, so if they have any negative comments in there, you're able to explain them and accept them and explain them. It's okay for something to be off, but we want to have an understanding of why, because that takes us in the next step to resolving them, which is the real goal, right? And so I've seen audit pages that were hundreds of pages long and very difficult to read, but you want to break it down to the sections and insist that your audit team do an executive summary also along the way. The audit information, the document itself, should have an introduction, the current status, your future status, projection, any critical management issues, risk management, and caveats, limitations, or assumptions. For example, an audit team might come in and only get 2 weeks to do the work, and they might say, well, one of the limitations was that we didn't have time to interview everybody we wanted to in terms of this audit, or visit the locations that we had planned to visit, that sort of thing. Okay, so responsibilities of the project auditor, and for you in return, to be honest and ethical. When they ask you a question, give them an answer. They should be independent of you, have no stake or part of your leadership chain. They should tell the whole story and help with technical issues, right? So there's a life cycle to this. When you want to do an initiation, you want to define your scope even of the audit up front. You want to establish an audit database so that you can find the data quickly and manage root cause analysis and other messaging. You want to get an assessment. I once had an audit that lasted about 2 months, and every Friday I asked for an assessment of current status. And then I also asked to see the audit reports in draft as they were being developed prior to the final. And then, of course, the audit will terminate and the report is done. But you're not done. One, you want to implement recommendations. Two, you want to communicate them up the chain and manage messaging while telling the right story. Okay, so these are some essentials of any audit and records management, just like in procurement, absolutely essential to the success of the whole project. Okay, measure, measure, measure. Many aspects are easy to measure, and performance is really something you want to study. I think of the triple constraint mostly, and root cause analysis should be part of that if it's off. Now, there would be, in the initiation with the audit team, some rules of engagement. When you can contact people, work around your key functions, because you still have to do your business at hand. Make sure they have permissions to enter your database for access, or have authority to see some of the classified information, and develop teamwork with them, a sense of trust that goes back and forth. Okay, that's it. Auditing, easy but important.